This tutorial is sponsored by Autodesk. So today we're going to be looking at combustion and creating a flamethrower, which hasn't been the easiest. So I just kind of want to go through this, and I'm not going to connect every single node together and show you how to make a particle system. I think that would be excuse me, a waste of all of our time. But I am going to go through it methodically and talk about some very important aspects. Look at this. Terrible. Right, let me just pause the graph and let's just get to it straight away. Just give Maya a second to think about everything. How's everyone been? It's been a while. Sorry, I've been busy and, life is just mental. Right, what's happening here? There we go. Right, let me just stick a new output in here. So, where am I going to start with this? Right, the most important aspect of combustion, and I said this in my last combustion fire video, is your source. And without your source being interesting, detailed, and whatnot, you're not going to get the correct look that you want. Even with influences and fields, which we need. Your source is really important. There are some times where you can use a source and you don't need you don't need it to be interesting, and you can just use fields like a smoke plume or something like that. But for things like flamethrowers, explosions, and that, we really need some interest, and it's going to help us create all the sort of little micro vorticities and that kind of thing. So here's an example of an actual flamethrower. So this is created by the Slow-Mo guys. You can find them on YouTube. They're amazing videos that basically, these guys basically film slow-mo effects, and I implore you that if you're into effects to go and look at this, because you can actually see in slow motion at a high frame rate how these things combust, explode, what the sources are, and it's really quite important. So Bifrost isn't it's not like the chemistry set that you got when you was a kid. It's actually a very robust, very intricate, very detailed, very temperamental, extremely realistic combustion engine. And I say that being someone that's used it for quite some time now. So anyway, let's get on with this. So we've got an output here, and just for now, just right now, we're just going to deal with a little particle simulation, and I'm just going to talk you through this. So I'm just going to put a little backdrop over the top of that, just so we know what we're dealing with. So we created a particle system, and obviously if you don't know how to do that, then we just type in the word basic, and we could just go down to a basic particle graph like that, and then you would right click on it and go explode, and in will come your particles. But being as this is a little bit more of an intermediate session, then we're not going to go through all of that in detail. So within my scene, I've got this guy with some terrible animation on it and a really awful flamethrower. He's not even got any fuel on his back, but this is a futuristic one. I've created two areas for our particles to emit from. I've got one little guy at the front there, and I've got this other little guy there that's doing some sort of splatter coming out of the sides. And I've just made it so that the normals are all pointing out in a direction that's kind of going to work for us. So I've got those two things plumbed in. Let's just get rid of this and this. I don't need those. Here are our two sources. So we've got this is the one at the front that's emitting a certain amount of particles. Now I want to talk to you about the particle emission. When we emit particles from one of these sources, we can't say start frame 1, end frame 10, then start frame 15, end frame 25, because we just don't have those options there. So what we use is rate. And the only way we can use rate is to plug something in, which I've done. I created this little node out of some really simple nodes. So if I just explode that, all we've got here is we've got an F-curve field, a scalar field, and then we've got time, and I'm dividing that time by number in case, and I probably don't need it, but in case I want to be able to slow down what I'm trying to do. So with the F-curve field plugged into rate, we then get an F-curve that we can play with. And if we've got an F-curve, we can then animate the rate over time. So, you know, we start off kind of low, and then we go up to 500 particles, and then we drop down to none, and then we come back up. And you can add these, you know, lots of little details into this as you want, just to give you more interesting particles, and I implore you to do that, actually. And also, we don't have to use it just for rate as well. You can also plug these in to, I'll just go back a second, a couple of steps. So look, basically, once you've got all these plugged in, you just go click, click, bonk, bonk, and then we'll just right click and go create compound, and that will create your field compound, and then you just go into it, and wow, these are miles away. Just go into it, and then anything that you want to be shown on your compound, and excuse me if I'm like showing you how to do something you already know how to do, but you know, some people don't. You just drag any element you want back to the input, and I just want to be able to play with the float, and I want to be able to play with the F-curve, and when we come back here we can see that if we select the compound, it's showing up what we need. Alright, so let me just go back a few steps, go back to that compound as it was. So we can now plug that compound into spread, speed, normal speed, age limit and size, and actually gives us a lot more options to be able to make particles do what we want them to do. You can even go as far as I've gone here, and it's probably not going to work because I made it in a different version, but if I go to Spark, this is a little part. Yeah, it's not working. It's only because there's I built it in a beta version. But basically, I've compounded up the entire particle system, and I've created 4 copies of that particle system, put them into one compound, so that if I just want like loads of different particle systems going on with different gravities on different sources and with different start and stop times, I can do that using Spark. And I've also added trails in there, so for every particle system, there's a trail system as well. And it just makes my life easier. I will share this when it's finished and working for this, because I created Spark, but I also created one called Dust, which works with Aero, and Spark plugs into Dust, and then I will create another one called Blast. Actually, no, I've got another one called Ignite. And as you can see, none of them are working because I built them in another version. I just need to go back and fix that. So Spark will plug into Dust, and Dust will plug into Ignite if you want fire on top of your Aero. And then I'm creating another one at the moment called Blast, which will be explosions, and just make everything easier for everyone because I can put in defaults. Anyway, back to what I'm trying to show you. So we've got our particles coming out. Now the particles come out, and if we just rewind and play here, let me just make sure my combustion is switched off. So particles for me, it wasn't enough. Right, we haven't got any particles there at all because the graph is paused. So yeah, particles for me just wasn't enough. We just get this kind of stream coming out, and it didn't really look like the reference I was looking at. And also what I ended up with didn't look like a reference, but if I spent some time with it, it would. So I had the particle system doing that, but then I thought, well, actually, no, let's use some NPM fluids on top of the particle system. So we're using the particles to drive the NPM fluid just by putting the particles into the NPM fluid source. We've just got some dissipation on point size, and I should say after the fact of the particles, I've got this set point size min and max, so that as the particles over time they get smaller and smaller, I can just control it with this little node here. But you can do, as I said, you can use an F curve in the size if you haven't got this set point size min and max. So if I drag in the NPM into the output as well, we can see that we're going to have NPM emitted from the particles. Now in the fluid itself, I made sure that the vibration speed was really low. I think by default it's at 50. I decided to bring this right down just because it's faster, to be honest. That's the only reason why. A little bit of speed on there, and in the solver settings, detail size of 0.1 and a low gravity because it was dropping down too early, so we didn't want that. So, and this is how that looks. It's nothing special, but what we're doing is we're getting like extra clumps of NPM over the top, and it's just giving us some more interesting bulges. It's kind of leaving the trail here somewhat, and it just gives us a little bit something more interesting to pass over to aero and combustion, and you want that, and both of these kind of die over time. Now, being as the source is the most important aspect of your look, you kind of want to get it right, so you want to spend some time doing this. Once you've got it right, it's a tricky one, but you can cache it out, and then you can use that cache, or you can be lazy like I am and not cache it out because it simulates really quickly anyway, and you can go back and make changes to it, and then if you're never going to touch it again, cache it out because, you know, it wants to be caching all day. So yeah, that's about it. We could spend some time to make it look more like the example that I showed you from the slow-mo guys, where around here it starts to really aerate and puff out, and the particles get smaller and more mist-like, and around here we'll get some curls and stuff like that. All of that stuff is going to help your combustion and the look that you're going for. So let's just put a little backdrop around these guys. So there's nothing to this really, and all I'm doing is let me just cut these. If you don't know how to cut, by the way, I didn't know how to cut for the longest time. Just hold down Shift and Alt, and then you can just start chopping around everywhere. So I dragged in. We've got the particle system coming into here, and we've got the NPM system coming into here as well, into these very source property nodes. So I'm varying the velocity, I'm varying the temperature, and I'm varying the fog density. What I'll do is I'll just click on each one of these so you can pause it and like take in my settings, temperature, and fog density. Again, all of these various sources are going to help give your combustion some interest, and that's important. Now, onto the source itself. Again, you know, pause the video if you want to take any screenshots, whatever, go for it. I'll try and share this file anyway. So I've got fog density mode at set, temperature mode at max, and speed at over. I've played around with these probably for about 4 days prior to this tutorial. I've got many different examples of how I got to where I've got to, which I'll put on the screen now. All of them with, you know, varying results. It's a progression, a learning experience. For some reason, you know, just doing explosions and combustion and any kind of simulation that needs to go up in Y is a lot easier than trying to get it to look right to go in X or Z. It just is, but you need to know what you're doing, and hopefully I've kind of got around some of that headache for you and you don't have to go through that. So I've literally just got absolute on, and the fluid detail size is linked to the resolution of the air, and I've got 4 different types of fuel. Fuel is once again very important. If we just use one fuel, let's say it was butane, it's going to be gaseous and it's going to give you a different look, a completely different effect. So I've gone with, if you look in the fuel information, you can see that someone has put in here that several source fuel nodes can be connected in the additional properties. For example, a map gas typically used for practical VFX consists of all of those: propane, propylene, propane, and in some cases propylene and butane. I don't think I've got butane here, but I use pretty much all of these in every simulation I use. If I want something that looks kind of heavy. Sometimes I don't, sometimes I just use one or two, but these are the sources. So again, I'll just select those on the screen so you can see my settings. Okay, and they're just plugged into here. So we've got a temperature of 200, and the temperature, various source temperature, is varying between 20, which is like ambient room temperature, and 1,000, which is like really hot. So we've got that randomizing while we're emitting, and which in some cases is going to ignite the fuel, and in some cases isn't going to ignite the fuel per frame. And again, once again, that gives us completely different looks. And the same goes for inherent velocity, the movement into those voxels, and that kind of push forward from the fluid is really important, again, to randomize, in my opinion. So from there, and this all looks really horrible, doesn't it? But I tried to keep the nodes standard. I've got some different nodes that I use on combustion, but I just thought, you know what, let's just do it with some standard nodes, so it's just easier for the tutorial. So let me just drop in a little backdrop here. So I am dissipating fog density with rate 4, because I don't want too much smoke coming up. And if you notice that actually on the source itself, I do have fog density set to 1. Dissipation, rate 1 on fog density, same with temperature. But in temperature, we put in the ambient background heat from the aero solver. The ambient temperature is 20 in the solver by default. So we put that in there. So the heat is dissipating over time, which is cooling it, and we're getting more smoke. And obviously, the higher the number you put this up, the more you're going to cool the temperature over a quicker amount of time. But you can also add like a modulate influence into this if you wanted, or some kind of fractal field or time. We've got wind, which is pushing all of our simulation forward in -Z with some drag. Turbulence speaks for itself, and then we've got this vorticity influence, and vorticity is what gives us some detail, kind of micro details within the fog density. And plugged into the back of that is a modulate influence, so that, because over time, if we just use vorticity influence, we'll get this kind of fuzzy looking smoke. It's very diffused and it doesn't look right, so we just modulate that over time. And then, quite simply, we've just got, combustion settings. If you don't know how to do combustion, if this is your first time doing combustion, when you create an aero node, you will type in basic, and basic aerograph will be in there, and you would just right click, go to explode, and then anything you want to create, you can right click on certain areas. You can put them in manually, but on an aero solver, if you want things to blow up, you need combustion, so you'd right click on that, go to create node, and then go to combustion settings, and that will create the node for you right away over there for some reason. And the same with, if you want fuel, you can just right click on your source air and create node, and source fuel will come up over there for some reason. A default one will come up, which is methane at its ignition temperature, and yada yada yada. It works for all the rest. In this actual simulation, I haven't used any colliders, just because it slows things down, and we aren't dealing with like the fastest simulation anyway. But it's not too shabby. Just while I think about it, and I just saw this in the edit just now, is I didn't really go in too much detail into the various thermodynamic properties of the aerocombustion node itself. These are really super important, really important. So expansion scale, if we've got that at 1, we're going to get like huge explosive plumes coming out. We don't want that at first, and so I kept that down at 0.1. For a time I did use a random node on the expansion scale. That does give an interesting look, but in the end I just kept it at a set number. Radiative heating, for the most part, with all of those examples that I showed earlier, I didn't have radiative heating on. However, I found that radiative heating, along with a little bit of fog density, actually helped me get some more ignition into that fog density. So radiative heating for this example of the flamethrower is needed, in my opinion, because if you have it off, then you just got fire around your particles in a straight line, and you've got fog on top of it. But you want some of that fuel to ignite into that fog density, and as such, radiative heating works for that reason, which is why we've got, you know, some yellow and reds going on around here. If we had that off, we wouldn't have that. We would just have it basically only just past the actual source. Radiative cooling is set to 1 because I do want it to cool down. Obviously, the lower you take this number, the more your radiative heating is going to have an effect, and the rest I just kept the same. I do not have emit soot switched on. If I had that switched on, we would... Sorry, oxidized soot. If I had that switched on, we would be losing some of this fog density, some of this nice smoke where it kind of looks like it's burning diesel. So I left that off. But for the most part, on some of the earlier examples, I also had oxidized soot switched on. So it kind of depends on the look that you're going for. But these combustion settings are one of the most important, if not the most important settings that you're going to use. So yeah, just take note of that. And yeah. In the assigned material, I'm just using what we've now got inside Bifrost, which is I can just start typing standard. We can get standard volume materials within Bifrost now, which is really handy. We don't have to go off to the hypershade, create a shader, drag it back in. We've got it all here, and it's got all of the settings that we've got on the shader, and I believe there's a standard surface as well. So it's really handy to be able to tweak it in graph without having to go back and reselect it outside of that. Once again, I'm being naughty. I've got loads of outputs on my output, and let's just drag that in here, and let's just have a little look at how quick this simulates. I would say the resolution isn't like crazy, 0.01. It kind of depends on the distance of your simulation, but if we play this, obviously we've got some fog density going in, and we can see that we're starting to get some combustion happening, and it all looks terrible at first until it starts stimulating a bit. You've got to remember, we're looking at this frame by frame. It all looks very different when it's playing as a animation. Now, changing those modes, the fog density mode, the temperature mode, and the speed mode, will give you wildly different results. So, you know, I usually start with all of those being set to set, and then from there I start to move into other areas to see how quickly I want to push certain information into the voxels. So, I mean, this isn't too slow in terms of a simulation. What's nice is that we've got the feedback in Arnold, and if I just dock this down here, we can actually go into the shader and start to play around with density. If we want that smoke to look thicker and stuff, we can play around with that in here and bring down the temperature and whatnot, just to make it a little bit more yellow and stuff like that. Obviously, if you want to take more of the fog out, we can go into this source and we can just lower the fog density. But that is about it. That is how I created a flamethrower effect. If you look around on YouTube, there are some other examples, some realistic, some not very realistic at all. I had a look at one, I believe it was Fume Effects. It kind of looked like the sort of flamethrower that you'd get from a tank, you know. It was too much. So it's always good to get yourself a good example to look at and take it from there. But that is it. And it seems like a really quick tutorial because it's taken me about 4 days of playing around with all of this to get us where we are. But, you know, there we go. Anything inside the solver settings to look at just quickly. Yes, buoyancy I've got way down. I've taken buoyancy down to something more of an unrealistic result. Higher than that, I was finding that the smoke was drifting really high. So I kept that low. Now, in the kill voxel fog threshold, I was playing with having much smaller numbers in here, like 0.01, and you will pick up more details, but sometimes there'll be details that you don't want. Sometimes there'll be a little particle ping off somewhere, and because your threshold is so low, the combustion will follow it, and you can actually slow down your simulation by doing it, and it doesn't look so great. Steps are all the same. We can higher these steps if we want a little bit more of more time taken on the simulation. And I've just left the style to smooth. We can change that. It will change the look of it. I believe that is it. All of this is all natural, homegrown Bifrost stuff as it stands at the moment in the latest version, which I believe I'm using 2.5.10. And that is it. So I'll try and share this scene somewhere with you so you can just have a play around with it yourself. Play around with removing different fuels, and also play around with the actual the different modes in here. Because if we did something like put temperature to set and put speed mode to set, we're going to get a different look out of the gate. And sometimes it's not what we want. See here we've got some big fat plume happening and everything doesn't look quite right in my eyes. There are multiple reasons for that. So yeah, let's just put it back as it was. So just keep in mind that Bifrost, like fine tuning is everything. Your source is everything. And always take a note of the settings where everything worked, but another good idea is to literally grab everything, Control C, create a new graph and give yourself a backup version which you can have switched off, save your scene, carry on in this one, and if you go too far and make too many mistakes and it's just too much of a headache, then you've got your backup sitting there to be able to go back and play around with. There's perhaps a better version. Alright guys, another one coming soon, and I will speak to you soon. Thanks a lot, cheers.